Dear church, let's talk about prayer. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited to have my good friend Boo Scott on the podcast today to talk about a subject that I think we can all relate to. Maybe we've all struggled with and maybe we've all benefited from. It's prayer. And so who better to talk about prayer than Boo Scott, who I have heard is an expert in this subject, in this field. Is that right?
I don't know who you've been talking to, but I'm by no means an expert in prayer.
I don't know that any of us are, but we can certainly talk about it, can't we?
Absolutely. It's a topic I definitely love to talk about for sure.
Absolutely. And so before we jump into our subject, you have been at National Park Church of Christ in Hot Springs, Arkansas has it been a year yet?
Oh, yeah. A year and a half.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. It's flown by.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the kids are great. Wife is great.
Yeah. Everything's going good, Chris. Now we love it. Still kind of in the honeymoon phase, you know. I think we're slowly getting out of that phase. And yeah, people are getting used to us here and maybe bored with us. I don't know. Hopefully not yet.
No, that is not the case. I've heard from folks that are really loving the work that you're doing here. And, you know, for those of us watching who don't know, Boo had married into Church of Christ royalty. You know, his wife, Amanda, is the daughter of, we affectionately call him the president of the Church of Christ, Jeff Jenkins. Yeah. And, you know, we love Jeff. Got to see him this past week. So that was great too. And you were the subject of conversation for a little bit there as we talked about the great things you're doing there.
Man, I appreciate that. Yeah. I love my family, love my in-laws. I'm blessed for sure.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being on today to talk about this topic. You and I know this because Wes and I are good friends, and I listened to the podcast that you were on recently with Wes. Right. And you and I are, maybe you've finished the book. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm reading Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. Mm-hmm. And that book has really helped me. I'm currently doing a series on prayer here at Walnut Street. And I don't think that's a subject you can preach on too much. And every time I preach on it, it's kind of like the topic of suffering. It's just one of those topics that's very relatable to everybody. And so as I was thinking about, you know, topics and podcast episodes, I thought, well, this would be a good time to have Boo on and we discuss this subject. I want to start here, Boo. Why do you think it is, and maybe it's not for everybody, but I know that I've had many people tell me that they really struggle with prayer. Am I doing it right? Am I, you know, what are the details? What are the particulars that I need to focus in on? I think there's a lot of questions surrounding the topic. So let's start there. Why do you think so many people struggle with prayer?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with it. And just like everybody does, I think. And the book that you're talking about by Tyler Staton is one that has helped me for sure. And I think it's a great resource among many. There's many out there, but it's the one that I've recently gone through as well. And it's helped discipline me more. And I think that's one reason that we struggle with it is a lot of people just aren't disciplined. We don't make it a priority. Or we get so caught up in our daily routines. You know, again, we don't discipline and make it a routine. But really, well, I mean, when it boils down to it, I think it's a faith problem. I think when the rubber hits the road, it's just either we feel as though God hasn't listened to us in the past, or we feel as though God isn't there. Or prayer becomes sort of this, you know, checklist item of I need to do this in order to be a good Christian. And that never motivates anybody to do anything. You know, it's never motivational to feel like you have to do something in order to follow God. It's trying to find that place where you want to do it and where you recognize who God is. And that's one of the beauties of it the more and more you pray, at least for me personally, is it's not so much that my prayers have been just, you know, miraculously answered. And all of a sudden I'm like, sweet, I can do this and get the things that I want, you know, but it's more of a, I want to be with God. I get to know God more intimately. rather than just head knowledge. It's heart, and it's building that relationship. But I think people don't pray because they've been upset in the past. They've been disappointed. They have lost trust in God, or it's become too cliche for them as a Christian.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like it's kind of like the national anthem. The national anthem is played before or sung before major sporting events. Even locally here at our high school, you'll have the national anthem played or sung by a student before the game. But, the national anthem has no bearing on the game whatsoever. I mean, it doesn't affect the game any at all. It's a ritual, a tradition that's a good one, but that's one that we do before every sporting contest. And I think sometimes prayer is seen that way. It's a ritual, it's a routine, but it has no effect on the game of life, none whatsoever. Right. And, trying to get to that point where it's a relationship more than a ritual is the goal, I believe. What would you say the goal is in prayer? And maybe that's where we've gotten off track, is we've misunderstood the goal.
Yeah, it's definitely a relationship. And Tyler Staton talks about that in the book and emphasizes that. And I agree with him completely. I mean, when you look at the big scheme of the Bible, the grand story of the Bible is we once had a relationship with God. We severed that relationship, and God has done everything in his power to bring us back into communion with him. Yeah. And so we have so many of these, they're rituals, but they're meant to be blessings, they're not burdensome. They're meant to be gifts for us in order to commune with God. Prayer is just one more of those, just like the table is, just like, when we come together, we're communing with God at the table every single Sunday. It's this remembrance of who he is and how he's pulling us back to himself. And yet when Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, it's full of relationship language. It's this, you call the creator of the heavens and the earth Father. I mean, you don't get more relational than that. And it's a gift. It's a, I get to talk to the God of all things visible and invisible. I get to, and you build that relationship, and it's getting to a point where I think we recognize what a gift it is and what a blessing it is, and then we start to truly desire it. But the core of what prayer is pulling us to is definitely a relationship with Yahweh.
Yeah, I think at least I've done this in the past. I misunderstand the goal, and I tend to think that maybe the goal in prayer is to get something. Whatever it may be, not just material, but I mean, I think some, look at God like some sort of divine genie or Santa Claus, and here's my Christmas wish list, and you go to God in prayer to get it, like he's some sort of blessings vending machine. I don't think that's most people, but I think sometimes we can fall into that trap. But even if it's not material, I think, it's easy to, be tempted to look at prayer as this is me getting something. And so I go to God with my cares, my concerns, give me this, God, whether it be health, prosperity, whatever it may be. And when the overall focus should always be, I'm going to God because this is a relationship, because I love him. I want a relationship with him. I want to draw closer to him. And I think when we start there, then the rest of it tends to fall into place. You mentioned when he teaches the disciples how to pray, they saw him praying and they asked, Lord, teach us to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, well, had they never prayed before?
Right.
I mean, obvious
voice.
Yeah, I mean, that was prayer is a pillar of the Jewish religion. And so obviously they had prayed before, but not like this, not like Jesus was praying. And it is my contention that what they saw Jesus doing was engaging in a relationship, not a ritual or a routine. They saw something deeper than they had ever seen, and they wanted what he had. I think that's a beautiful testament to prayer and what we're trying to gain in prayer, which is the relationship, right?
Right. And it's, I think we're throughout history, and even at that point when he's teaching the disciples, there's this kind of fear of God, not in the sense that we should fear God, of reverence and awe and respect, but a fear of God is distant. He is beyond me. There's no way that I can approach him. And Jesus comes and reveals the true character of God and fulfills all the scriptures that were really always pointing to the true character of God, and shows them you can approach this God and call him Father. I mean, and the Hebrews writer tells us to approach the throne boldly. And so many times we're hesitant to do that because we still have in the back of our minds that God is angry at us, or that God is out to get us, or that God is that we have to do a dance and a jig and be pleasing to him, and we have to shout so many glories and praises before we can even approach him. And it's like
Right.
it's like we've got a mad stepfather that we got to walk on eggshells around, and Jesus shows us a completely different God, one who we call Abba. It's this intimate crawl up in the lap of term. This is a God who has a chair for you at the table. This is a God that has a listening ear. And so many times I don't think we view God that way, but that's exactly who Jesus presented his Father as, and who our Father is. And if prayer is about relationship, and Tyler Staton talks about this in the book, he's like, you don't heal a relationship by distancing yourself from somebody. You heal that relationship by talking, by communicating. And so if if I'm upset with my wife, or she's upset with me, more likely, if I've done something wrong, we're not going to reconcile that relationship by me not calling her, by me avoiding her at the house, by us walking by each other in the hallway, not talking to each other. The way we heal that relationship is by talking. And a lot of people have a severed relationship with God, and either through disappointment, either through God didn't answer my prayers, or God, why did you allow this to happen, or whatever it may be. And we forget that relational aspect of it is, I'm not going to heal that relationship by not talking to him. I'm going to heal that relationship by talking to him, and by being still and listening as well.
No doubt. No doubt. Boo, you hit on something there that maybe you've experienced this as well, but I can't tell you over the last few years how many people have come to me and said, you know what, I was raised in, a church or in a home where God was presented, much like you just said, as like a mad stepfather, maybe like a ruthless dictator or a tyrant who is just waiting for me to mess up, to catch me on a technicality.
Right.
So I have to make sure I cross every T and dot every I so he doesn't turn me into a French fry for all eternity. and I've heard that a lot lately. And, it's done a lot of, it's done a grave disservice to the character of God, but also to what we're trying to accomplish in prayer and the relationship aspect. Because, if that's the way you view God, then it's hard to have a relationship with someone or a being like that.
Right.
And, Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. I think sometimes we get the cart before the horse, and we start with rules before relationship because we feel like I've got to, I've got to earn my keep here. I've got to be worthy. And if I do enough, and if I keep the rules enough, that I can please him, and then he will accept me. When it's all about the relationship, rules just modify behavior, right? That's all they do. I mean, I know plenty of people who obey the speed limit, not because they're righteous, but because they don't want to get a ticket. And, so the rules only find meaning in the relationship. And if we could ever get that down, I think that it would really change how we approach God, and probably have a lot to do with how successful our prayer life is.
Right. We love him because he first loved us. I mean, that's the motivator. I don't talk to God out of obligation or out of some merit-based system to where I have to talk to him 3 times a day in order to be saved. And I think about my relationship with my kids. If Jesus is going to invite us to call Yahweh Father, I'm going to think about it in a parental relationship. And so,
Absolutely.
I sit on my kids' beds, even when they've messed up or I've disciplined them, And, I say things like, buddy, I love you more than anything, right? Like Romans chapter 8, the end of Romans chapter 8, nothing will ever separate, nothing in existence can separate you from the love of the Father. It's the same thing. Like I try and tell them the same thing. Like there's nothing that will ever prevent me from loving you. There's nothing that would ever stop me from loving you. And what I'm trying to do is to set in their hearts and their minds is it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how much you've messed up. You can always come to Dad. And I want them to feel comfortable coming to Dad. It's not a, yeah, there may be consequences for my actions. Yeah, there may be like results from choices that I make, but that doesn't mean that I can't go to my dad. My dad will always be there. My dad will always love me. And my dad will always do everything in his power to help me and save me from certain situations. And, in a much more grand way, that's who God is. And if we being evil know how to give our kids good gifts, how much more will our Heavenly Father, bless us? Like, it's fascinating to think about the ways that Jesus has introduced this God to us.
Yeah, it really is. And I think therein lies another issue that people have with prayer is they've been disappointed.
Right.
They've come to God in prayer. They've asked for healing. They've asked for, strength through a difficult time, or maybe that he removed the thorn from their flesh, metaphorically. And they feel like God didn't come through. Or maybe they feel like he didn't answer their prayer, or he didn't answer it in the way that they had thought that he would. And so they have disappointment. Maybe they hit their knees and they pray and pray and pray and nothing ever happens in their mind. Right. Talk a little bit about disappointment with prayer and how we can overcome that. I would tend to think that it goes back to, is it God's will or my will? I think so many times we want to, I talk in general statements. This has happened to me. I feel like when I first started out in prayer, I wanted to bend God's will to my will, when it should be the other way around. And when you try to bend God's will to your will, you're always going to be disappointed, right?
For sure.
But talk a little bit about disappointment with prayer and how that affects our prayer life.
Yeah, I mean, if you've lived any amount of time, you've been disappointed by prayer. You pray for somebody to be healed. You pray for somebody not to die. And they die, or they suffer. They struggle, and it is disappointing and it's confusing. And it's like, well, Jesus, you told me to ask and I would receive. You told me that anything I ask in your name, I'll receive. You told me to knock and the door will be open. It's like, why is that door shut? We all these phrases run through our heads, and so we approach God boldly, and then we wait.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I've come to realize is that things that I prayed for that haven't been answered, such as, someone dying when you don't want them to die. And we always try and buffet our prayers as if to give God an out. We say, Lord, your will, but not mine, And we're copying Jesus in that, in the garden. And I get that. And that's a beautiful thing to say, and a humble thing to say, and a reverent thing to say. But it's as if we don't want to be disappointed again. It's as if we're given a safety net. And I still say it, but so many times in the back of my head, I'm like, God, I really want you to save this person. And, something I've realized throughout my time, my life, and my prayers is the death of that person is not God's will either. Like, God doesn't want anyone to die. That was never God's intent. God doesn't want a child to suffer and die. And the beauty of it, I think, is realizing that you may be asking for something that God is going to fulfill. God is definitely going to defeat death, just not yet. Like he's already defeated it through the cross of Christ, and through the resurrection, he has foreshadowed that defeat, but he hasn't ultimately defeated it yet. So people still suffer. People still die. But God's saying, hold on, it will happen. But I think the beauty of prayer is yeah, God may say, well, that person is going to die, and yeah, boo, you're going to die. Everybody's going to die. But hey, I am right there beside you, suffering along with you. That is not my will that that person dies. And God cries with us. God is sorrowful with us. God aches. And, Romans 8 says that all of creation groans and longs for the adoptions of the sons of God. It's like everything in creation is groaning at the death and the curse that sin has brought upon this world. And prayer is a part of prayer, and realizing that relationship aspect is my prayers may not be answered the way I want them answered. They may be, right. They may not be. The beauty of it is I can feel God's presence with me and God agonizing with me, alongside me in the midst of that suffering. And just knowing that I have my Father there with me, I can get through almost anything.
Yeah.
I mean, even my kids, if I'm with my kids, like they can be terrified, they can be hurting, but if dad's with them, they feel way better. They're still going to have to go through that suffering. There's suffering I can't take away from them. And there's suffering that God is ultimately going to take away from us, but it's still a part of the curse. It's still a part of bearing through sin. And God sits right there with us in the ashes and says, I got you. I got you. Yeah. And to me, that's where prayer lands. It's not so much in bending. I think we should ask God to bend, like to change things. I think that's a big part of prayer. And I think that's throwing our trust upon him and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. I think that's a big part of that relationship, but we're disappointed a lot of times.
Yeah. No, great points. And I think, these things like suffering and the disappointments that we go through are reminders. I think they are ways of refocusing us, because I think so many times that it comes down to an investment issue, an investment problem. Right. We've invested so much in this life that we can't see the next. Instead of investing in the next. I think that prayer can be a passport, that it takes you from the physical to the spiritual. It allows you to, to access the spiritual. And so you have a problem in the physical, you go to the spiritual, right? And I think that all too often it's an investment issue, and sometimes our prayers can be more focused on temporal, earthly things rather than heavenly things. But I also think that all too often, we get ourselves into a bind and we start to, find disappointment in God because we're thinking about things that really ultimately, compared to eternity, don't matter. And maybe God is trying to remind us of that,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember too, Chris, people are the ones that we're primarily upset about whenever we pray. If somebody dies, right, or somebody gets sick or something bad happens to somebody, the people in my life, I only have them because of God. And that's something I remind myself of too. Like, I only know my wife because of God. I only know my wife because of Christ and what he's done. Right. I only have my children because of Christ. The people that I love are a gift to me from God. And to me, it boils down, and I have to ask myself this question of who do I love more? Yahweh or my family? Yahweh or somebody that I've lost? And seeing them as a gift. And to love is to risk losing. I mean, it's better to have loved than never loved at all. It's better to have loved and lost than have never loved at all. And you see the time you have with people and the brief temporal times that we have as gifts. And I think that helps us bear through them, and it helps us lean upon God more than we typically do.
Yeah. And certainly I don't want to make light of any of this that we've been talking about, because of all the things we say, it's still difficult, but life is messy and life is tough. And, we talked about this past Sunday in this series on prayer, that prayer is difficult. Prayer is messy. Prayer is agonizing at times. And that's one thing in the book that we've been talking about. And again, it's called Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. One of the things that he talks about that I guess I knew, but he brought it into clear focus, is that, David was one who prayed, with an open heart. And his prayer life is not what we typically think of when you look at prayer. I mean, so much for the whole concept of praying for your enemies, right? I mean, he's praying that God, kill his enemies and remove them from him. Yeah, exactly. David was very open and honest in prayer. It reminds me of my friend Ralph Gilmore. He told me one time that he was talking with a lady who was mad at God and disappointed with God. And he said, "Have you told him?" And she was like, "Well, you can't do that." And he goes, "Well, he already knows."
Right.
So, go to him with an honest, open heart. We don't always think of prayer in that way. I think there's a formality that we believe we have to, follow, a procedural, context that we have to follow, flowery language or whatever it may be, and certainly we don't want to remove reverence from the equation. But I think, all too often, we don't look at it like the relationship that it is. And so therefore we make it a little more formal and we feel like, we can't bear our heart, where David shows us, you can tell him anything and everything, right?
Right. And it's a beautiful, a man after God's own heart. It's a beautiful example of that relationship. And in the book, he talks about praying as you can. Can you pray for 3 seconds? Pray for 3 seconds. If all you can talk to God about is complaints, then voice your complaints. He already knows them. If you've got questions, ask questions. If you can sing a praise to him, then sing a praise to him. Pray as you can. Can you pray 30 minutes today? Pray for 30 minutes, And I like that thought of just start a conversation. Like if you're not talking to God, just start a conversation. If you've got beef with God, then bring your beef before God. He can handle it. I mean, you talk about David's Psalms, you read Psalm 88, it's like, whew, man, that person is ticked off, You walk through Lamentations and you get to Lamentations chapter 3, and it's an all-out rant against God. Like what happened? And you see this language throughout the Bible, and I think it is an invitation to lay your thoughts before God. And there's a reverence there. There's a respect there. You realize who you're talking to, but at the end of the day, at least we're talking. At least we're talking.
Yeah, that's one thing that he says in the book is that, we wonder sometimes, am I even doing this right? And he said, well, you can't do it wrong or right unless you're doing it.
Right.
And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but, you can't, I think the way he stated it was just do it.
Right.
Just start talking to God. And let that be kind of the impetus, is just start the conversation, because you can't do it wrong if you don't do it at all, And of course, his point being that I think sometimes we look at it right or wrong, when in actuality, we need to be looking at it as, am I doing it or not? That's really what it comes down to, and start the conversation. Talk a little bit, Boo, just in your own personal experience, kind of what we might call the particulars, when, where. I realize there's several postures for prayer that are mentioned in the Bible, so there's not really one way of doing it. The beautiful thing about prayer is you can do it when you're driving in your car to work, or you can do it when you're standing in line at the grocery store, but I do tend to believe that, at least for my own personal prayer life, and I would advise others this as well, that it is good though to find a time where you block out the white noise and you find time to be alone with the Father. Talk a little bit about your prayer life and what you do in order to accomplish that and to foster the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my prayer life has struggled over the years, like tremendously struggled, and I haven't been disciplined in it until more recently. And my prayer life really, in a lot of ways, is just I pray as I can. I always want to be thankful and mindful of the little things throughout the day. So that's where I say my little quick prayers. I thank you, Lord. I just want to recognize my daily bread, and I want to recognize God in the midst of everything. But I have tried to discipline myself to have a place, like a place I go. And for me, I like to be outside. So there's a place here in Hot Springs, there's mountain bike trails and trails around lakes and things like that. And I've fallen in love with that place. And oftentimes, at least one day a week, I go to that place and spend a significant amount of time praying. I'll stay off my mountain bike and I just walk. And I'll walk around the lake and I just talk to God as if he's walking with me, as if, or we're just spending time together. It's not me just constantly talking. It's me walking with a friend and speaking with him. But having a place it's almost made that place holy in a sense for me, because I long to get out there. Like if I'm busy throughout the week, it's like, I need to get to my place. I want to get to my place. So I think it's important to have a place. I remember Dan Winkler speaking about after he lost his son many years ago in that tragic murder. Dan Winkler talks about, he would have an office, I think he said over his garage. And I've heard him preach before, and he talks about wearing out, like the carpet was worn out. There was a path in the carpet worn out because he would go to that spot to pray so much. I've heard the son of, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy that translated the Message, Peterson, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Eugene Peterson,
right. His son wrote a memoir about, he would just witness his dad down in the basement in his office wrapped in a prayer shawl, and he just all the time just rocking and praying. He said, I would peek through the door and I would see my dad just constantly in prayer. Oh man, like to have a place to go, whether it's a room, whether it's a spot, whether it's a chair, whether it's under a tree, whatever your place is, like have a place. And that's you and God's place. And that's helped me tremendously to be disciplined in my prayer life. Yeah, I can pray as I can. I can pray throughout the day as I go. But man, when I go to my spot, like I'm zoned in and I'm there, fully there with God, because a lot of other times I'm distracted. And then I also spend Thursdays praying for this congregation. And I've made it a point to make Thursdays, I walk around, and this is kind of a private thing, but I walk around and I just run my hand over every chair and I pray for the things I know going on in the lives of this congregation. And I pray for the success of this congregation in the sense of we will glorify God, and I just walk around the room. I stand at the pulpit and I pray for my messages to be helpful, to be godly, to be touching to people and help them have the mind of Christ. And, pray for everything within the life of the church, because a lot of times people say, well, I guess all we can do now is pray, and I hate that phrase. Like I absolutely hate that phrase, because prayer is the absolute most powerful thing we can do. And he says it in the book, and it stuck out with me, and I highlighted it. Something along the lines of like, we think that our most powerful work is done in public, but actually our most powerful work is done in private. And I truly believe that. Like, these prayers make a difference. I mean, they absolutely make a difference. And it may not be the outcome I want, but it's the outcome God wants. And I'm content with that.
No doubt. Yeah, that's great. I do the same thing as you. I've always on Thursdays walked around the building. So I go outside and walk around the building and pray for our elders by name, their families, pray for our people here, and pray for our staff. There's also a good app. It's called Echo for those who are viewing and listening. It's called Echo. It's free. And you can, schedule prayers. So like at 1:27 during the day, not every day, but certain days of the week at 1:27, I'll have a reminder to pray for my family. That's from Psalm 127. And, you can do those kind of things. You can keep a prayer journal in that app and reminders of who you're praying for listed by name. You can set reminders as well. I know that sounds a little odd, scheduling prayers and things like that, but, I'm for anything that will help develop my prayer life and make it better. And so Echo is a good app as well. But what you said reminds me of the ultimate example, because Jesus never let the pace of life deter him. He never let people rob him of his first priority. He exercised crowd control frequently and broke away and would find a place of solitude and pray, which brings up the question, if Jesus needed prayer, then how much more do we, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, you know, he would push people off. Like, look, I know you need to be healed and I know you got problems, but I'm going to the mountain. Like, that's where I'm going, and I'm going to pray.
First things first.
Yeah. Like, he lived with a rhythm, and we got to adopt that same rhythm or we'll burn out.
Yeah, totally agree. Boo, thank you so much for coming on today. I mean, you've become a regular on the show, and I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate so much the work that you do, and and you taking time out of your schedule to come on here. And we like to highlight the good on this podcast. So plug anything that you'd like to plug. Let people know kind of where you're at and what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah. I don't have anything to plug, man. We're just here. We're just here grinding and loving it, and we're starting a bunch of new series, and we're trying to get small groups going. We have small groups going, but just trying to get some discipleship things going, and we just love our local work and really pouring into our local work and really enjoying it. But yeah, thank you, Chris. I love you, dude. You know that. I hope you know that.
Yes, sir, I do.
And always love spending time with you.
Same here. And that's the National Park Church of Christ in Hot Springs, Arkansas. If you're traveling, looking for a great church to go to, look Boo up, visit with them. It's a great church family, and just appreciate you so much being on here, Boo. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a specific question for Boo, then certainly we will forward that to him, and he would be glad, I'm sure, to answer that for you. Thank you so much, Boo. I'll see you next time.
All right, buddy.
Yeah. And thank everyone else for tuning in as well. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.